Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Monday, August 2nd, 2021. Yes, it's hard to believe it's already August. And boy, have we been enjoying some really nice summer weather in many parts of the state as we have a warm ridge of high pressure centered over the interior. It's influencing areas from the Southwest Peninsula and the South Central areas all the way on up into the southern slopes of the Brooks Range and toward the west even. You're getting a chance to dry out. Let's take a look at what we got to talk about. Record warmth with high fire danger has returned in east central areas. In fact, just a short time ago, the Fairbanks area has tied their record high of 85 degrees. And they're going to likely be back up in record territory tomorrow. 88 is the forecast high. 87 is the record there in Fairbanks for Tuesday. And also places like McGrath will likely be near record highs of 84 degrees on Tuesday. Also, we're having a little weather system that's rather potent. There's a large trough of low pressure out over the Bering, but the southern end of that's going to have an area of low pressure that brings strong southerly gusty winds, gale force to storm force gusts at the tip of the Alaska Peninsula around Cold Bay on Tuesday. We got more rain moving in the southern panhandle, especially Tuesday night into Wednesday, where locally over an inch of rain could fall around the Ketchikan area and the southern portion of Prince of Whale Island. And then it's going to turn cool and very wet across south central areas here over the weekend and into next week. So get out and enjoy the next few days because that's going to be it. We have quite a change, and look at this summertime bloom. This is our little garden area outside of our entry at the Weather Service office in Anchorage. You can see those lupin there in full bloom. Very beautiful scene. We've had just outstanding weather this past weekend. Well, because of the warmer temperatures, dry conditions, east central areas have seen the fire danger ratchet back up after the rains of last week. So a moderate risk for significant fires starting there, Yukon Flats and eastern Alaska Range. And that'll be the case here Tuesday into Wednesday, though there will be some showers and isolated storms riding along just south of the Alaska Range into portions of the Copper River Basin, eventually Talkeetna Mountains as we go through tomorrow and into Wednesday. So here on the weather map, satellite imagery, you can see the counterclockwise spin in the Gulf. There's an area of low pressure there. And then out toward the west across the Bering, there's a band of brighter enhanced cloud tops associated with a frontal system. Now this frontal system is going to weaken, but it's the southern end of it. There's a piece of energy rotating through that's going to move on across on Alaska there to Sandpoint, Cold Bay. That's going to bring some stronger southerly winds ahead of it, along with some areas of rain. And the main low pressure system is there just off the coast of eastern Russia. And that system is just going to be kind of sitting out there here as we head through the midweek. But meanwhile, ridge of high pressure, mid and upper levels of the atmosphere are really bringing some fine weather to the interior southwest, Yukon Valley, where many readings have been in the 70s with some 80s, and those record highs up around Fairbanks. You can see weak high pressure there just east of Kodiak Island, a bit of a trough, thermal trough there along south of the Alaska Range with a few showers and thunderstorms firing up along that. Those are going to be pressing slowly westward into Tuesday and Wednesday. But the main weather feature is the couple areas of low pressure and frontal system that's out there in the Bering. And as that system is going to tend to weaken, but it's still going to have some areas of rain and some stronger southerly winds out ahead of it as we go through tonight and during the day tomorrow. But that southern tail end of the trough is where we have a shortwave, a piece of energy that's going to spin up this area of low pressure there through the eastern Aleutians, and ahead of it, that's going to bring those gales along with some storm force wind gusts there, especially around Cold Bay on Tuesday. Meanwhile, back in the east there, we have the trough of low pressure, or I should say the low pressure in the Gulf, and there's going to be a frontal band of rain spin up northward that will bring additional rainfall there to portions of the Panhandle, especially the southern half, where some areas could pick up locally an inch or more of rain Tuesday night through the day on Wednesday. And then some of that moisture spreads further westward. Southern interior could see a few showers, isolated storms pop up again Wednesday afternoon. So here are the low temperature forecast Tuesday morning. lower mid 50s, the inner waterways of the southeast, lower mid 50s, I should say, and same thing for south central areas. And then temperatures on Tuesday, under cloud cover, some scattered light showers. It'll be cooler there in the southeast, maybe 68 at Haines, 67 at Juneau. But look to the west. McGrath could be up there around a record-tying 84 for a high. And so it's going to definitely be warm out there on the other side of the Alaska Range in the upper Kuskokwim Basin. And then low temperatures Wednesday morning, generally in the 50s, mid to upper 50s in the southeast. Lower to mid 50s across south central areas and temperatures. Wednesday afternoon, again under the cloud cover and rain, upper 50s to lower 60s in the southeast. If you get a few peaks of sun, maybe Haines up there to 69. Otherwise, again, south central areas could see readings in the 70s, still holding on to an 80-degree reading at McGrath. And then going across the Arctic coast, lows will generally be in the 40s, lows in the 50s with a few 60s. Fairbanks overnight low of only 64. And look at this record high of 88 forecast for Fairbanks on Tuesday, with other temperatures on the downslope side of the Alaska Range in the lower to mid 80s. So this is going to be some of the warmest weather for a while. It could be the last hurrah of the really warm weather. Looking out to the west, even 70 at Kotzebue. And then lows will generally be in the 40s along the Arctic coast and 50s to near 60 across much of the Yukon River Basin. And there's 80-degree temperatures pushing westward there into the day on Wednesday. As I said, this is going to be some of the warmest weather we see perhaps for the rest of the summer. Southwest interior, lows in the lower mid-50s. Upper 40s, near 50 along the water there, extending out into the Aleutians, and then 84 near record high there for McGrath for Tuesday afternoon. And as we go into Wednesday morning, lows will generally be in the 50s, some lower 60s there along the Yukon River, and generally mid-upper 40s in the Aleutians. And we could still see readings in the 70s, Aniak at 73, 69 at Bethel, but still isolated 80-degree reading going up the upper Kuskokwim and the Yukon River Valley. Well, here's the temperature outlook, and it has turned around from, I told you, the beginning of August was going to be quite warm, especially the interior and south central areas. It's going to change. We are looking for a cooling trend. The lower 48 is going to see above normal temperatures, eastern Great Lakes and northeast, and wherever that happens, that allows for a cooler, wetter trough to set up over the state of Alaska. So we anticipate temperatures to cool down next week, especially after this weekend, and precipitation to average above normal, especially the southern half of the state, including south central areas. And there are going to be a series of weather systems that really bring in some decent rainfall along the Kenai coast on up into south central areas around Cordova, Valdez. Could get quite a soaking here by early next week, and that moisture will be spreading further northward too, and even over the Alaska Range. So please get out and enjoy this fine later summer weather, because it's not going to stick around forever. And I definitely see a change coming up here, the transition this weekend into early next week.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, here's your flying weather, and if you are planning a flight Tuesday into Wednesday, we continue to have a ridge of high pressure at the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere over the interior of the state, and it's going to retreat a little more over in the northern and northwestern portions of the state here heading into Wednesday, with low pressure out over the near central Gulf of Alaska, and then a broad area of low pressure across the Bering, especially the western half with frontal system, and a little impulse that'll be working its way through the eastern half of the Aleutians here as we head through Tuesday. Tuesday afternoon, we could see isolated to a few scattered storms along the Alcan border through the Alaska Range, Talkeetna Mountains. And then as we head out along the coastal areas of the Kenai, Prince William Sound, and creeping up into the southern areas of the Panhandle. Otherwise, a lot of IFR out there over the eastern and central Bering Sea. Wednesday morning, IFR more pervasive south of the Alaska Range through Cook Inlet, the Kenai, Prince William Sound, and then creeping northward up along the length of the Panhandle and down along portions of the Alaska Peninsula. And then Wednesday afternoon, still some isolated convection from the Alaska Range westward into the lower Yukon Valley and on up east of Kotzebue up there, the western southern slopes of the western Brooks Range. So past conditions for AKwx on Tuesday will be IFR to start out in the north entrance there, becoming VFR for the south throughout the day. Similar situation for Adigan, IFR in the morning, north entrance becoming VFR, otherwise VFR south entrance. Lake Clark and Merrill, look for MVFR conditions becoming VFR later morning and afternoon. And as we go a little further north, Rainy Pass, general VFR, but an isolated storm could pop in the afternoon. And that'll be the case also for Windy Pass. That should say Tuesday, not Thursday. VFR with an isolated storm possible in vicinity of the pass, also for Isabel. And as we head on over east toward Mentasta, there will be that potential for an isolated storm developing in the vicinity of those passes. Even down there at Tanita, also possibility of an isolated storm developing in the afternoon in vicinity. Otherwise, VFR conditions are expected. And it's going to be a split there at Portage. IFR conditions are anticipated east entrance and out over Prince William Sound, but MVFR conditions for the west entrance. And Chilkoot and White should hold on to another day of VFR conditions, but IFR conditions will be creeping northward as we head through Tuesday night and Wednesday. So freezing levels are lowest there out over the Gulf, below 8,000 feet in association with that area of low pressure. And then also in the western half of the Bering Sea on up into eastern Russia, freezing levels drop below 4,000 and down to 2,000 feet in eastern Russia, whereas the interior of the state is generally 10 to near 12,000 feet. And icing potential, there will be some isolated moderate icing there, far southern panhandle, Haida, as well as south central coast, 12,000 to 18,000 feet, and then a long frontal system there in the eastern Bering. The lower end there, the eastern Aleutians, 15,000 to a flight level of 22,000 feet. That falls off to 12,000 to a flight level of 19,000 feet there southwest of St. Lawrence Island. And looking at the jet stream level winds at 30,000 feet, circulation clearly showing up there over the Gulf of Alaska. Onshore flow 60 knots southwest there up into the Panhandle. More of an east-northeast flow 75 knots out over the Kenai. And then 100 plus knot jet core up through the central Bering, pulling in out of the south and southeast. As we drop down to mid-levels, high pressure firmly entrenched there over the Brooks Range in the north, low pressure there in the Gulf, and then we see stronger core of winds 45 to 55 knots from the eastern Aleutians on up through the eastern Bering west side of the state. And dropping down to 3,000 feet, we see the circulation out over the Gulf there with 35 knot south winds coming onshore through the Panhandle. And then out there along the west coast, just off the west coast through the eastern Bering, winds anywhere from 35 upwards to near 50 knots at the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, generally from the south. And a quick check of turbulence. There is the potential for turbulence surface to 3,000 feet around St. Lawrence Island, and then surface to 4,000 feet for the Seward Peninsula. And then areas of the southwest, lower Kuskokwim Delta there, on in through the Alaska Peninsula, surface to 4,000 feet. So if you're heading out, have a safe flight.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks. Or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Tillman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks, Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Here's your marine weather, and we start out with the sea ice edge. There still remains a little bit of brash ice from some ice that broke away off the Russian coast well over a week ago in the lower Chukchi Sea west of Kivalina. But otherwise, if we go up along the Arctic coast, we still have ice that's the pack ice continues to slowly melt and just kind of retreat. So we continue this trend to continue here as we head through the week, given the fact we've had some rather mild temperatures for a change. And taking a look at the way things are shaping up on Tuesday, we do have a area of low pressure out in the Gulf, and ahead of it, southeast south winds the inner canals. Winds 10 to 20 knots, waves a couple of feet though, could be up around 4 feet. Ketchikan and the mouth of Dixon Entrance. And a little stronger there, Craig on up toward Gustavus, 25 knots out of the east-southeast with waves around 9 feet, but less so in the way of wind. Generally easterly winds, Yakutat westward, and waves of 4 feet. On Wednesday, we'll see the inner waterways, north winds 10 knots, Skagway down toward Juneau and Petersburg with waves of 2 feet, but southeasterly 20 knots and 7-footers there near Ketchikan. And then as we get out toward along the outer Gulf Coast there, winds out of the east-southeast 20 to 25 knots, waves around 9 feet. More easterly to northeasterly Yakutat westward and waves 6 to 8 feet. The northern Gulf, including the south-central coastline, off the Kenai, variable winds 10 knots, waves only 3 to 4 feet, 2-footers there in Prince William Sound. A little more channeling up through Cook Inlet, winds having a southerly component at 15 to 20 knots, maybe upwards to 25 knots northwest of Homer, waves 5 to maybe as high as 7 feet. And then more variable winds and waves only a couple feet in Cook Inlet on Wednesday. Winds will become more westerly or offshore the Kenai, 10 to 15 knots, and waves only 3 or 4 feet. Now, across the Alaska Peninsula, the tip there that we have a frontal system that'll be approaching from the west and winds out of the southeast and south. Gale force 40 knots there at Cold Bay with gusts up to 55 knots possible. Otherwise, other areas, winds will not be as strong. 10 to 15 knots around Kodiak Island, waves 2 to 4 feet. And then on Wednesday, strongest winds bypassing the area to the northwest with that frontal system, but winds turning more southwesterly, 25 to 30 knots there along the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, and waves 6 to as high as 8 feet on the Pacific side, and generally variable winds around 10 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, and waves 2 to 4 feet. The eastern Aleutians will see winds, gale force winds of 30 to 35 knots along that front as it pushes through Dutch Harbor. But areas back toward the west that shifts around to the northwest, 15 to 20 knots. Atka there at waves 5 to 7 feet on the Pacific side, 4 to 6 feet on the Bering side. Variable winds around 10 knots and waves around 5 feet west of Adak through Kiska and Shemya. And then as we go through the day on Wednesday, winds will be southwesterly across the eastern half of the Aleutians, around 20 to 25 knots. Waves generally 6 to 8 feet. More westerly to 20 knots at Kiska and west of Adak, and waves 4 to 5 feet. Along that frontal boundary, as we get just east of St. Paul, St. George, on up to south of St. Lawrence, winds will be picking up 30 knots from the southeast with waves 7 to 9 feet. Offshore flow 15 knots, 2-footers there in Norton Sound. And then you can see low effects of that low pressure off the Russian coast. Winds upward to 35-knot gales between St. Paul and St. Lawrence, and waves building 10 to 14 feet. Offshore flow there, Norton Sound, 20 knots out of the east with 4-foot waves. And then along the northwest coast, the lower Chukchi winds will generally be southeasterly, around 20 knots on Tuesday with waves of 2 to 4 feet. Easterly winds to 20 knots along the Arctic coast, and waves generally 3 feet. And on Wednesday, the winds along the Arctic coast will be 10 to 15 knots with waves of 1 to 3 feet. And generally east-northeast around 20 knots across the lower Chukchi Sea south of Wainwright on up toward the Bering Strait, and waves 2 to 3 feet. And a quick check of the weather maps. There's that low-pressure system off the Russian coast with the frontal system, an occluded front that'll be weakening, becoming more of a trough, but nevertheless has breezy conditions along it, and a low-pressure system out over the Gulf will be sitting there on Tuesday, bringing more rain into portions of the Panhandle, especially later Tuesday night into Wednesday. So that does it for our show, and certainly thank you for joining me this evening. I'll be back again tomorrow night for the latest on Alaska statewide weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.